Ignorance and intolerance, religion and politics, man versus machine, themes representing Rey Weidenaar's love-hate relationship with humanity, first drawn, then etched in reverse into copper plates. A complex technique, the illustration so detailed, you need a magnifying glass to see it.
From the magic behind the hidden messages to the process, we explore
The world through the eyes of Weidenaar on Newsmakers.
he is among the all-time greats.
Oh, there's no question. In the history of Western art, you can count on one hand the masters of the etching form. Rembrandt, Dürer, probably Hogarth, probably Whistler, and Rey Weidenaar. That's a jump, but it's only a jump in time. In terms of their capacity, their understanding of their medium, their ability to make those metal tools, scratching on copper plates, they were side by side from the beginning.
Rey Weidenaar was undisputably a master of his craft of etching. My favorite Weidenaar etching is one called Locomotive Shops. It's a wonderful piece that shows the inside of a railroad yard in Wyoming, Michigan, just outside of Grand Rapids, with this amazing viewpoint from down low of a giant locomotive being hoisted up in the air so that it can be worked on. And it's a really wonderful depiction of machinery and people interacting in this really interesting way. And it's sort of a theme that Weidenaar explored in a lot of his works, but I think it's best executed in Locomotive Shops.
The process itself, we're talking about plates and performing in reverse, right?
Yes, absolutely.
This is a real feat.
So Rey Weidenaar was undisputably a master of his craft of etching. And more than that, there are actually 6 different types of what we call printmaking that he was a master of. And there's actually one print that's another one of my favorites. It's called 6 Ways to Draw in Copper, where he actually, in a single image, incorporates 6 different types of etching that each have different tools, different processes, different techniques, and then allow the artist different qualities in the finished product. So the sort of 2 examples that are easiest to explain or talk about or contrast are an etching and a mezzotint. So an etching is nothing but lines. It's created by using a sharp tool to etch a copper plate, and then when a print is made, the reverse image shows the black ink fills in the lines. A mezzotint, on the other hand, is nothing but tone. There is no lines. This is a process where he is essentially scratching the entire plate to create a black surface to start from, and then burnishing or erasing certain parts to create white. They're 2 sort of exact opposites of each other, and unlike any other contemporary of his that I can name, he was masters of both. And he used them both to great effect depending on what he was trying to portray. So for example, It's a Terrible Day is an etching because it allows him to incorporate all of those small details throughout this work.
You could stare at it and study it for days, and you will find new things. I can't say that that's true for me every day that I look at it now, but I still find things. There's a broken down shed on this farm scene, and it looks like just a touch will cause it to collapse into nothing. And there's hay all over the place and little chickens running around, and just complete chaos. But if you look closely on the eaves of that little shed at an angle, there's a sign. You can see some lettering in there. And if you look closely, what it says is Calvin College Parking. What was going on there? He was poking those people. He was making fun of them. Not in a mean way or a sarcastic or sharp way. He was just, you're humans too. Just like all the rest of us. We all have the same problem, including finding a parking space. Although, why someone would need a parking space in the middle of that chaos, no one could tell you. Ray would have to be here to tell you.
What is his worldview?
I think it is a love-hate relationship with humanity. He loved us as the human beings around him. He hated us because we could be stupid, we could be intolerant, we could be unsympathetic and humorless. Well, he never gave up on us. And I think that through his artwork, he would prod us to take a look at ourselves, to laugh at ourselves, to reassess our points of view. How fair is that? How valid is that? And made us think. That was his, I think, his greatest accomplishment, is that his artwork, you can't walk away from it without saying, wow, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Where does that come from? He's born in 1915. How much of that is upbringing? How much of that is just experience while he's maturing and growing up?
I can't say with precision. Of course, I didn't know Rey Weidenaar. There are people in Grand Rapids who did, many of them. Many of his students are still here. I think that it came from an artist's eye. He was an observer. He wasn't carrying the sign. He was chronicling others carrying the sign. There are others who will paint or etch or sketch the parades and the ribbon cuttings and the rest of that. Rey wasn't interested in that. He was interested in the everyday. The beauty, the pathos, the tragedy, the triumph in everyday life, in the life of people who were not wealthy and powerful, but were living their lives doing the best they could. And sometimes he shows us that was pretty good.
He has a series of etchings of Mackinac Bridge, which he regards as an engineering triumph. You know, it's the human ingenuity at its best in these very triumphant images of, you know, people made this. Something like the bridge in the storm, which is an image of the Mackinac Bridge, is a mezzotint, because what he's really trying to convey is a mood of an approaching storm sweeping in on the Mackinac Bridge. The intricate details are not what he was seeking there, and so he used a different technique.
Tell me about that theme and why it was so important that he delivered that over and over and over again.
I'm convinced that a lot of his work, he's exploring this theme of good and evil. And in his mind, technology could be either. And there's another one of the Amway Grand Plaza Towers where the technology, the machines seem to have gotten out of control. Technological change and advancements can be a wonderful thing that benefits humanity, and in other instances, it's a little bit scary.
We have a detailed etching of the facade of St. Mark's Church on Division Avenue downtown that is about the size of a sheet of typing paper in its original form. And the detail, the commentary, the people that appear, people that are just sitting there on the curb, a dog running by in front. These are not the plumed parishioners. He wasn't interested in that. He was interested in the city life and what was going on outside the church. Well, you can see it in the small one, but you can really see it in the big one. That is the blown-up version. I don't know. It would be interesting to know if Rey could see them blown up, what he would have thought. I don't know what he would have thought. But it has greatly expanded the understanding and appreciation of his work.
How much is there a spiritual influence, a political influence?
Oh, all of that, there is. Rey Weidenaar was a product of the Dutch Calvinist community here, which could be and can be rather strict. Some would say intolerant, but it was also a community that was driven by very firm beliefs in moral principles, biblical principles, and about how people should live their lives. I don't think it's accurate to say that Weidenaar was a this or a that in terms of the political spectrum. He questioned authority, not in a violent way, in his work, but there are parts of his pieces where what he seems to be saying is, well, this may be the way it is, why is that? He shows people who are humbled by their circumstances and by the weather and by other things like that. Is that a pessimistic view? No, because I think ultimately it's an optimistic view, because he shows them going on with their lives. I think that's what makes his work appealing and culturally important as an image of the feel of the United States and, frankly, of this part of Michigan during the time that Rey was working.
As a boy, that's the question. When does he know that there's some artistic ability to move forward and to go on to Kendall and develop this talent?
He was not from the very beginning an etchings artist. He went through a progression of sketching, of course. There are a few watercolors that are beautiful pieces of work and arguably would have sustained Rey Weidenaar's reputation as an artist, but at some point he was attracted to the greater capacity of etching than other forms of visual art to express what he sees, what his message, what he wanted to convey to us. It worked better for him.
So he enrolls at the Kendall School of Design.
Of course, its beginnings, it was a memorial founding for the greatest of all of the furniture designers in Grand Rapids. It was the furniture capital of the world. David Walcott Kendall, his widow, after David's death, founded the school as memorial to him. But the Kendall School expanded. That attracted Weidenaar to that entity. Kendall benefited terrifically from his working with hundreds and hundreds of students who have been inspired by him to this very day. It helped put Kendall on the map. Rey Weidenaar was associated with them.
So the year is 1940, Rey Weidenaar is about 25 years old, and the world begins to see the world through his eyes.
That's true. 1940 was a pivotal year for many reasons, culturally and historically, not the least of which was the approach and arrival of some of the darkest days of humanity, and that was World War II. Part of Rey's work reflected that, the darkness, the hovering danger and despair, but through it all, he categorized and depicted for us the lives that went on. No matter what was going on in other parts of the world, no matter how it touched us here in Grand Rapids, he chronicled that in its most exquisite detail.
Why etching?
I don't know. My guess is that Weidenaar was attracted to its exquisite precision. In the space of the size of a postage stamp, he was able to put into a space that small what other artists would have put on a sizable canvas. And he had the capability, and let me tell you, it is perseverance, it is dedication, it is the exquisite detail, the jaw-dropping detail that he's able to include in these, seemingly as a matter of routine, because it's in all of them. I mean, it's if there was one work that was a magnum opus, it would be different. They were all like that, one after another, that if you don't look closely, you won't see it. And that's too bad, because that was when he was talking to us.
How long could it take to put one print
Sure.
together?
So Weidenaar was a perfectionist, and it would take him a very long time. A large-scale etching, which might be maybe 18 inches, that Weidenaar would put together was usually a result of many, many, many sketches. He didn't just start with a blank copper plate and an idea. He would sketch his subject and from all sorts of angles and all sorts of lights, and there's photographs of him in his studio surrounded by his pencil sketches as he prepares to work on an etching. Sitting down to create an etching like that could take many, many hours. Now, on the other hand, one of the other techniques that he used that I've talked about, the mezzotint, took an incredibly long time. One of the reasons that it's been described as a lost art that he brought back is because before you can even start what's called rocking the plate to create that even black background could take 30 hours of doing essentially nothing but scratching a copper plate with a metal tool just to create the base for your work. And then going back again and again, creating what are called states, where he would roll off a copy of the print to see what it looked like, and then going back to make changes. Many of his works have as many as 12 or 15 states before he arrived at a final version that he was happy with.
Are there lyrics to Johnny Verbeck's Sausage Machine? Isn't there a song?
There is a song. They had us turn it off for this interview so that it wouldn't be playing in the background, but it's a hilarious folk song that Weidenaar was clearly inspired by when he made this message, and it really illustrates how he used everyday life, something that was probably a song that he heard at a summer camp, and based an etching off of it.
Mr. Johnny Verbeck, how could you be so mean? I told you you'd be sorry for inventing that machine. And all the neighbors' cats and dogs will never more be seen, for they'll be ground to sausage meat in Johnny Verbeck's machine. For they'll be ground to sausage meat in Johnny Verbeck's machine.
The styles that he uses, is there a progression over time? Does it change?
We all come into this world thinking that everything is black and white, and we soon find that almost everything is in fact gray. Well, that certainly is carried forward in Rey's work, just like it is many other artists. The eye, the vision, is what is important. How does an artist see something? You and I look at it and we think we see the same thing, and you and I probably do. But an artist like Rey Weidenaar and other accomplished artists, they see things differently than we do. They see light and shadow differently. They see the meaning of things differently. That's what is translated onto their canvas, or in this instance, onto a copper plate. But always remember, it's in reverse. We can't pull out and show you a particular piece of his work and say, well, that was the apex. It went downhill from there. No, it didn't happen. To the very end, Rey Weidenaar was a progressively improving, more complex, more interesting artist with every piece of work. Part of that was his technique and his ability as an artist, as a craftsman, but also it was his worldview, his understanding, the way he saw things. That's what was so beautifully captured in his work.
We talk about seeing the world through the eyes of Weidenaar. How much traveling did he do?
Almost none. A few times when he was a young man in the 1940s, he was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, and he did travel to Mexico, where he did a lot of sketches that became the basis for some etchings that he did later. As he got older, Grand Rapids was his home, and he made it his own, and he didn't necessarily like to leave. With the exception of the Mexican scenes, just about every single etching in this gallery is based on a scene somewhere in Michigan, maybe from the Mackinac Bridge, down to Grand Rapids. Plenty of scenes from the lakeshore in West Michigan as well.
End of life, towards the end of his career. What was his life like the last few decades?
Weidenaar's career, as an etcher at least, really started in the 1940s and goes for about 3 decades, 40s, 50s, and 60s, of making a lot of etchings. He actually took a break from etching in the 1970s and got back to some other mediums, did watercolors and other things. But then at the end of his life, he died in 1985, went back to really what was his great love, which was the etchings. There is a slight change in the type of work that he was creating at the end of his life. One thing is that his eyesight was starting to desert him. The last, what I would call very detailed, large-scale etching that he did, I think, was in 1982. And after that, he actually starts to change a little bit. We haven't mentioned this yet, but one of my favorite quotes that Rey Weidenaar, he gave it to a Grand Rapids press reporter in the 1970s, is that abstract art offends me, and the lifestyle of some abstract artists offends me. Weidenaar was firmly a realist until the very end. If you look at some of the pieces that are in this exhibit that might date to 1982, 83, 84, the last few years of his life, you start to see a little bit of a change. Instead of such hyper-realism, there's a little bit more of his work reflecting the inner workings of his mind, or what he sees as the subjects of his work. I think by the end of his life, he was interested in the possibilities that could be afforded by abstract art.
Where did the art end up? Where did it go? Was he selling these pieces? Were they on exhibit?
All over the place is the short answer. Weidenaar was a working artist who supported himself through his art. He sold etchings through various galleries here in town. He was very liberal with giving them to his friends. I've talked to many, many people who own Weidenaar etchings or drawings or paintings. He bestowed them liberally on his students at Kendall College. And he had many of them that he kept as well, which became part of his estate, which the Van Andels eventually acquired and donated.
This exhibit and the Van Andels, they preserved a number of those copper plates. Often those were lost, right?
We're very lucky to have several hundred of Weidenaar's copper and zinc plates in the collection. Weidenaar frequently did not cancel his plates when he was done. So if you own a print, you might notice on the bottom it says something like, 17 out of 100. And usually when the full 100 have been printed, well, a couple things happen. After that copper plate is run through the printing press so many times, it will start to degrade. It's a very high pressure printing press to create those, and the sharp, fine detail sort of gets rubbed out of the metal. And so what an artist will usually do is cancel the plate by sort of scratching lines across it or outright destroying it so that more can't be made. For whatever reason, I don't know why, Weidenaar did not do that. Virtually all of the plates for his etchings were preserved and were collected by the Van Andels and eventually donated to the museum.
How many donated prints are here in the collection?
There are approximately 1,000 Weidenaar prints. This covers 230 unique works, and like I said, some of which have as many as 10 or 15 different states leading up to a final one. It's a wonderful collection. It's the most complete collection of Weidenaar's works anywhere in the world, and we think that it's very appropriate that it resides here at the Public Museum in his hometown.
In this exhibit, there would appear to be more than a dozen magnifying glasses here for people to actually take a close look.
That's only fair, given that that's what Ray had to use to make them.
Right, but there are the hidden messages to find
That's exactly
with those
right.
magnifying
Right.
glasses.
And that's a good way of looking at it. It isn't so much the detail as the massive impression that they give when they are in that size, but they were not originally in that size. There are pieces in this exhibit that have been blown up to 50 times larger. That they are floor to ceiling, whereas in the original format they were about the size of a piece of typing paper. And by doing that, the impression of the artwork is completely different.
This collection donated by Jay and Betty Van Andel.
An enormous collection. It was so fortunate and so far-sighted of Mr. and Mrs. Van Andel. We talked with members of the Van Andel family because what we wanted to know about is, well, just what you're asking, why? Initially it was Jay Van Andel. He was initially intrigued, but became very taken with Weidenaar's work. The Van Andel household over the years some rooms in the house were fairly plastered with framed Weidenaar etchings. And nothing delighted Jay Van Andel more, whether it was with his children or people who visited their homes, friends of theirs that came to the home. The magnifiers that are around this exhibit, they were on the table at Jay and Betty Van Andel's house too. And nothing delighted him more than showing either his kids or his guests some aspect that if you stand a foot away, you won't be able to see it. But if you stand up close with a magnifier, oh my God, there it is. You're right, I had no idea.
His office is behind us. Tell me a little bit about
Sure.
what we see here.
We have actually recreated an example of Weidenaar's studio based on some photographs that we have in the museum collection. And it includes the actual printing press that he used to pull every print in this exhibit. He was very, very protective of his process and every single piece of equipment that he used from beginning to end, from the paper to the inks, which he often made himself, to the press that he pulled every single one of his prints on himself. Just about every printmaker has apprentices or assistants who will do the pretty laborious work of actually pulling off 100 versions of a print on a press, not Weidenaar. He did it all himself. And so what we've tried to do with this section of the exhibit back here is sort of use those photographs to do a recreation of what it would have been like at the height of his career, to sit down in his office, be surrounded by all of these sketches, have a copper plate in front of you, have a printing press next to you. What are you going to make today?
What would he hope that they would learn from this today?
He would hope that they were getting it, that these are not just pictures on the wall, that they're statements about life. He would be pointing things out to them not in the way of A, B, and C, do you see it? maybe a little of that, but mostly he would be showing them, here's A and here's F, and letting them see in between. His work is collected, his work is scarce on the market. And that's not because there wasn't a lot of it, it's because it was snapped up and held close by collectors. Large collectors like the Van Andels, but humble collectors as well, who have one piece that they paid a few dollars for back 30 or 40 years ago, but they love that thing. And that's what we have here.